there are two folks for me to introduce. I can see one of them. Oh, I can see two of them. Great. First, Nick Johnson, who's a software engineer with the Ethereum Foundation and DNS lead. Oh, ENS lead, of course. I actually thought you said DNS, but it makes more sense for it to be ENS. And we're going to think up a snappier title for him during the session. And Peter Czaban, who is executive director for the Web3 Foundation. Yep. Welcome. I'll come over here, I think. Great. So I think we can build upon the last session where you can get technically rich or detailed or fine-grained in these business pitches and architectures, both on the value proposition and the go-to-market, but also on the technical side. I think you were in for some of that last one. Hopefully that means that there is a reasonably high level of technical proficiency in the room. We shall see. Who here has heard of the Ethereum Foundation? Who here has heard of the Web3 Foundation? So good. Yeah, it's a good start. Who here is, what's the overlap? Also pretty high. So that's great. So then with that little straw poll done, then I will ask each of you guys to introduce yourselves, how you came to this point a little bit in your lives, but also professionally. And then we'll pile into talking about what you're up to. Okay? Do you want to go first, Peter?
Sure. So I've initially worked on machine learning, and I started to see the crypto markets as something interesting. And I saw a lot of different protocols appearing, like PeerCoin, PrimeCoin, and all the other things. And then I got interested a little bit more in the protocols themselves, what kind of consensus they run, what kind of state machine, and so on. And then when Ethereum came along, I jumped a little bit deeper. And then for the last few years, I've been in the blockchain space. First, more on the research and development side, and now at the Web3 Foundation, more generally supporting the ecosystem.
And I joined the blockchain community a little over 2 years ago now. My prior experience being mostly in sort of large-scale software engineering. I was working at Google at the time on the privacy and security team. Came across Ethereum more or less as a massive coincidence, and was really enthused about what's being worked on and developed, and it feels exciting and new, and I decided I wanted to work on this. So I joined the foundation, the Ethereum Foundation, a little over 2 years ago, and I've been working for Go Ethereum, the main Ethereum client, sorry, I should say the most popular Ethereum client, since then, as well as on ENS, the Ethereum name service.
Great. So sticking with you, Nick, that's what you've been working on. What are the kind of main sort of challenges you're tackling, or what's the mission? How do you define your objectives and success on those projects? And then maybe we dig in a little bit to ENS, not DNS.
So in my mind, the main goal of ENS and a lot of important efforts, both at the foundation and elsewhere, including Web3 Foundation, are centered around improving the usability of blockchain, because that's one of the biggest barriers. So that's what we try and focus on with ENS, is making it easier for people to interact with the blockchain and removing a lot of the stuff that impedes them. And one of the big ones is the use of having to use blockchain addresses, big long hexadecimal identifiers, or if you're using Bitcoin, then these base 58 letter and number sets, where a single typo at best means that it doesn't work, and at worst means you've just thrown your money away, and replacing those with human readable identifiers. So that's the main goal of ENS, is to make it possible to use human readable identifiers everywhere. If you're using the web, you probably never need to enter or see an IP address, unless you're a developer working on something. And our hope is to ensure the same thing is true of blockchain applications. And
again, sticking maybe to the Ethereum Foundation for the moment, that sounds like a sensible thing. That's one project that helps with adoption. Maybe just give us a sense of what another couple projects, and how do you come up with those? Who decides that?
So there's not really a sort of a central party that says, this is what we're going to build. The Ethereum Foundation is reasonably diverse in terms of like the projects it works on and so on, but more importantly, it should only be a part of the whole community. And there are projects all over the community doing this sort of thing. I guess probably the biggest and most exciting projects are some of the scalability efforts and so forth. From a usability front, things like Consensus's MetaMask project, various projects to work on improved wallet interfaces and so forth. Basically anything that gets people using easily understood user-level software instead of the stuff that developers write for themselves is an asset in my book.
And how are you taking feedback on that? I mean, what's your approach? I mean, you said most popular. How are you measuring success in that sense?
I think it's a definitely difficult problem. To some degree, you can measure it by adoption, but then things like ENS don't necessarily show their direct usefulness in terms of, like, it could be difficult to measure how many people are using ENS, and that may not give you a true indication of how much it's aided the ecosystem as a whole. So I think the main way in the long run that we'll measure success is, does this get widely used by a lot of people who are not enthusiastic about blockchain in and of itself? Does it become just another piece of infrastructure that everybody uses? But in terms of short-term metrics to measure that, it's a lot tougher.
Got it. So we'll come back to the questions of sort of governance and prioritization and decision-making you touched upon, but Peter, maybe on your side, some of the projects and purpose.
We try to step back a bit and try to think what will be fundamentally needed to build widely used decentralized applications. So when a developer decides to build a decentralized Uber, what kind of capabilities do the protocols need to supply to him in order for him or her to be able to build that application? So of course we know about blockchains that are able to process transactions or some computation, essential computation for a given application, but we also need to store files or send peer-to-peer messages that might not need to be recorded on the blockchain. So from there, we try to think what is the stack of protocols that would enable this type of development of decentralized applications, and then once you see it from that perspective, then you can try to look at all the different projects that are out there in the space and try to figure out where do they fit in this stack. Are they building any of the infrastructure? Are they building some applications that will be running on this infrastructure? And then, in order to bring this kind of Web3 framework to life, we need to we try to think what are the biggest problems or what are the biggest hurdles in order to deliver this usable Web3 protocol stack. And there is a number of different things that we do to help with that. So. One is conducting research in order to solve fundamental problems that are still needed to develop some of those protocols. So we have an in-house research group, but also working externally with different groups that are solving some of those problems. But try to really target it towards this protocol stack and try to solve concrete problems. Then develop those protocols based on the research and our general understanding of the needs that the application developers will have. So we do it by collaborating with teams from the space, either funding the development of certain projects, such as blockchain interoperability projects like Polkadot, which is one of our bigger projects, but also trying to get together different teams that might not normally collaborate with each other to figure out how do they make their protocols work well together, so that at the end we can build a set of APIs or set of bindings for developers to then be able to build applications. And then on top, we try to bring together application developers to actually, first of all, inform them about the existing protocols that they can leverage, and maybe so that they can collaborate better or not solve the same problem 10 times. So for instance, we were running a decentralized exchanges workshop where we try to bring together 15 different projects that build decentralized exchanges and figure out how we can kind of get there more efficiently and faster. Yeah.
Again, so I want to come back to the question of the highest level of sort of governance and decision making, and indeed how this is all funded in a second, because it's always a good thing to understand. And so again, if we keep thinking about that topic, but you mentioned now decentralized exchanges as one class, shall we say, of applications that you might want to foster. What are the and previously we were talking about sort of adoption in general. It's kind of so that makes sense at the kind of the very fundamental level. What are the other types of applications that you have thought fit to kind of prioritize alongside decentralized exchanges? What are the other use cases you kind of test against?
So there is we are not particularly favoring any projects, but definitely decentralized exchanges is one interesting and kind of popular vein of applications. There is things related to any sort of supply chain tracking, asset tracking type of applications. There are things around sharing economy that are pretty interesting. Things especially that are in the digital domain, so something like ENS is a very interesting project that could potentially function pretty soon. So where we look at the applications, we really need to, especially now, have in mind what are the limitations of those decentralized protocols, because hopefully long term we'll be able to develop a lot of the capabilities of those protocols, but currently they have a certain set of limitations that we need to have in mind. So things like usability, things like general scalability, and a number of other issues. So only applications that kind of have that in mind and kind of the projects that internalize what are the limitations can bring something successful to that.
So again, now I want to take us to this question of how you're organized at the highest level to prioritize your activities and how that's funded and how your teams are structured and located, and maybe back to Nick for that. But your thought about scaling, it would be great to try and unpack that a little bit. How do you guys think about helping the community tackle the challenges of scaling? But Nick, on governance.
So the Ethereum Foundation is funded through the crowd sale it did before the launch of the Ethereum network. And by
how's that treasury doing?
Pretty well, thanks to the increase in the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum since then.
Who makes the decisions about the treasury of the Ethereum Foundation?
The board of the foundation.
Who sits on that?
Is the chair, the executive director of the foundation. Vitalik is on the board, and a couple of other Ethereum founders are on the board. I'd be hard pressed to name them all off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. So they basically decide the allocation of funds from the foundation, and it's a combination of the Bitcoin they raised, in the crowd sale, the Ether they issued when the blockchain started, and the funds that it's been sold for since then. And the foundation historically has used those funds mostly to fund internal development efforts. So things like Go Ethereum, Mist, the Ethereum browser client, Whisper, Swarm, and so forth. Whisper is decentralized messaging, and Swarm is decentralized storage. Recently, they're moving more to supporting, additionally supporting funding of external efforts through a grant system. Mm-hmm. And in fact, ENS, my own project, has been a beneficiary of that, and that we just got given a large grant to spin off into our own organisation with funding and staffing and so forth.
And again, that decision is taken by the foundation board?
It is, yes.
So there's 5 people on the board?
I believe so, but again, it'd be hard pressed to name them all.
And meeting never, or only over Zoom, or kind of?
Meeting irregularly, but reasonably frequently.
Got it. Different locations. So Novogratz said earlier, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, that we were lucky to end up with a smart and nice leader. He used a stronger term than that, in the shape of Vitalik. Of course, that's not always going to be guaranteed. So I'm trying to delve into this question of, for these decentralized projects, how does one try, it perhaps always is going to start in the mind of one or a few different people, some given project. So there has to be some transition from few to many, but how does one best manage that? So that's the topic that I think it's interesting to share to the audience.
it's definitely a thorny problem, and it's not unique to blockchains, but I think blockchains are kind of taking it in a new direction and exploring it from new angles. I think having a prominent leader can be a great benefit in that if there's somebody who people trust and whose technical decision making seems to be sound, then they can sort of lubricate everything. Everything's quicker and simpler and more seamless when you have somebody who's prepared to step up and say, I think we should do this. But it's explicitly a consent model in that if you decide you don't like the decision making of that leader, you can fork off and create your own blockchain and so on. Unlike the real world with governments and so on, you can't go make your own Britain because you don't like this one. I mean, you can. It's called America, but
I thought it was called Brexit.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You get one or the other. Whereas in blockchain, you can literally take the whole state of everything and go, I'm going to copy it over, but with this thing changed. And I think that makes for really powerful decentralized decision making. And I think almost more importantly than that, because everybody knows that's a possibility, they have a vested incentive to try and keep everybody who is interested engaged and part of the process, because you know that if you try and build a system just for you and your friends, then everyone else is going to go off and make their own copy.
Yeah, so definitely credible threat walkaway options that creates hopefully a healthy sort of dynamic tension. That topic comes up quite a bit in the context of the value of utility tokens, and whether or not if you end up forcing the users of a network to stake or hoard too much of the token that's intrinsic to that network, whether you'll force the network to fork, and how easy it is to fork a network for either of those reasons. Any thoughts on that? I mean, how easy is it to find the talent to support a fork of Ethereum if I went out there and, for instance, wanted to do that?
Yeah, for a large network like Ethereum, it's definitely non-trivial. And that is the countervailing factor. Like, you want the costs of switching to be fairly low, but not zero. If they're zero, then you end up with 1 trillion forks and nobody can use anything. And yeah, the main countervailing factor is like the network effect and the costs of maintaining it. And I don't think you can eliminate those things, but you can make them lower.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Great, thanks, Nick. Peter, on that,
Yeah. I think it's one essential part of the those new types of protocols they are supposedly not controlled by any single party, or like multiple parties can participate together in order to run them, and for such a protocol to really adapt and not be completely static and deadlocked, we need to figure out what are the decision-making processes for those types of protocols. And there is currently, the way they are usually designed is that there is the default position that everyone that is part of the network takes is that the protocol will be static forever. So you get a certain piece of software, and this certain piece of software has in it assumptions that the protocol will function forever in the same way. But really, if we look also at countries or other types of real-world organizations that run, the default is that, for instance, in a country, that everyone follows whatever laws are being established by the government that is being elected. So, and this ensures that every time the decision is to be made, you don't need to make a conscious decision that, oh, I'm not going to make a coup or like make my own country and not participate anymore in the wider community of my country, but rather you just keep following the rules, and that's the default. And if you really want to do a coup, you need to fight with your government and separate into another country. So this is a new idea. This idea of, in case of blockchains, is called on-chain governance or governance within, kind of from within the protocol, that tries to optimize for an additional thing, which is not only for ability to make decisions, but also prioritizes ability to maintain cohesion of the community, because a lot of the value of the network is because of its cohesion or because of the community. So it's a very new topic. How do we design kind of systems that where there can be a process for people to come together and actually come to some consensus on how decisions should be made, or how the protocol should keep moving. And for most people that use the protocol every day for everyday interactions, they can just follow along with the decision-making process, while people that really want to rally behind certain directions, they can do so. And it's not that those people that rally in a certain direction, they rally behind closed doors, but rather they participate in an open process that everyone can have visibility into. Yeah, so we'll be organizing a workshop on-chain governance to discuss those kinds of topics. But right now there is a number of different projects that try to work on those kinds of problems and reintroduce this decision-making ability, or remove this kind of deadlock that we often see in those protocols where they cannot adapt.
I mean, as you said, a new and indeed complex area, but an opportunity now to see the outcome of many, possibly thousands of experiments in governance and token economics kind of more broadly. And it came up earlier today as whether you're a student or a mature student or just looking for something exciting to do, as an interesting opportunity to focus your someone's brain power on that and become expert. But who would you feel is expert today, the individuals or organizations? Who do you?
So for designing those systems, I think governance is an extremely complex mechanism, and really the way we arrived to our governance in most of our institutions is by kind of slow evolution and tiny changes. There has not been many kind of radical changes that suddenly resulted in a completely different system. So I think a similar thing needs to happen in blockchains. Like, we don't really understand how any given proposal will work in a live environment. So I really love any project that actually tries to deploy some sort of system with a governance on top of it, or some sort of process for decision making, to see how they will work, and then we'll see with each
You don't see people doing that.
There is more and more people, but I would like to encourage more people to do that. And there is maybe like I think Gnosis deployed CogX, their decentralized exchange, with a governance system on top of it, but really not many protocols kind of have an interesting working governance system. So I think experimentation is the way to go, and then seeing.
I mean, it's hard to simulate human behavior, obviously, but maybe there's room for some simulations, even if it's, I don't know if anybody's developing such things.
I think, we should design the best ones that we can, given the lessons that we've learned up to now. But
experts, who do you view as the experts in this space currently? Experts in governance. Individuals or companies or leaders?
So there is a number of projects that focus exclusively on the question of governance. So projects like Aragon that try to just design governance systems for different institutions. There are projects that focus more on particular types of organizations, like Colony here in London that works. There is blockchain projects that try to kind of, as one of their distinctive features, they try to introduce governance into the blockchain protocol itself. So there's many of those, like Tezos, Polkadot, Cosmos, like a bunch of other ones that kind of try to market themselves. But you can introduce a lot of the same features to existing protocols. So something like Ethereum, there have been some proposals how you can do it or try it out, and experiment.
Great. So thank you. Back to you, Nick, on scaling. And if you had a chance to kind of formulate a kind of a structure, how do you break down the thinking at the foundation into the scaling challenges, and maybe give us an overview of what the key projects are and the state of the state of the chain?
So there's, scaling is definitely. I would say usability and scalability are kind of the two biggest challenges, and scalability is probably the one we know the least about. But there's been a great deal of research in the last 3 years or so, and we are getting closer to having deployable solutions, and Polkadot is one example of that. The main efforts going on at the foundation and outside would be centred around a few avenues. One is state channels. So
Explain to everybody
Yep.
a little bit what that is.
Yep. So state channel is basically the idea that suppose you and I are, for the sake of argument, playing a poker game, and we each put down £20, and instead of every time we deal a hand, we make a blockchain transaction, paying out however much the individual hand went for, we keep track of, who's up and who's down. And at the end, we just submit the net total of the difference and resolve it then. And obviously, for that to be trustworthy, you need some sort of system whereby if you decide you're not going to submit the transaction, I can prove that I won the hands, that I was better off, and vice versa. So you use a bit of reasonably clever cryptography, but fairly straightforward, to basically every time a transaction happens, we both sign it. We both say, yes, I agree that this hand happened, and we'll refuse to go any further unless we've both agreed to it. So at their base, they're reasonably simple, but they can be expanded in a number of ways. For instance, instead of just state channels for payments, you can expand them to cover things such as general sort of applications and control flows and so on. So instead of just containing the amount I won or you won or whatever, we could actually encapsulate the entire poker game there. And now we can actually prove who won the hand and so forth, that neither of us were cheating. Or to take it to a less gambling orientated thing, your electric car or your solar panels can use a payment channel to record, every time your solar panel sells a unit of energy to the grid, you can exchange a signed message with the grid operator saying, yes, now you're owed a little bit more money and so on, until once a week or whatever you cash it out for your net earnings. So it gives you most of the guarantees of a blockchain with very little of the overhead. One of the other ways you can expand it out is with a state channel network. So suppose I want to pay you $10, but I don't know you. I've never, this is the first time we've met, but we both have a mutual friend. I can send him $10 and he sends you $10, but the whole thing is handled transparently. So I just hit the go button and it finds a path between the two of us.
And which are the most successful projects on the state channel side at the moment?
So there's probably the most so the largest general purpose one is called Raiden. They have released a proof of concept called Micro Raiden, which is an individual payment channel, and are working on a network. Probably the most successful example who are deployed in a robust and ready environment would be Funfair, who are based here in London actually, and they're working on state channels for online gaming. And they have a robust and workable solution that I've seen that is very impressive.
Other approaches to scaling?
Yeah, so one of the other approaches is side chains, which are similar in a way to state channels. The difference is that with a state channel, you eventually shut it down and merge it back into the main chain. With a side chain, it just keeps running sort of in parallel to the main chain. And every so often you send data between the main chain and the side chain to update state and so on, but generally it continues to persist. Plasma is one effort in this direction. Polkadot bears some similarities, although I'm sure I'll be corrected about that. And these potentially allow for application chains, where your application has its own chain. It does all of its local stuff there, so people who care about your app only have to listen to that chain, and then periodically it synchronises with the rest of the world.
Got it. So from your perspective, those are the two main approaches going at the moment?
There's a third one, which is sharding. And sharding is basically the effort to take the main Ethereum chain or the main Bitcoin chain or whatever and split it into a number of almost identical copies, where each copy takes care of like a strict subset of all the transactions. But then, of course, you need to have some way to coordinate between them, since you want to be able to send from anyone to anyone else. And that's definitely the most complex to get right, and I suspect it's the last one that we will see deployed in production.
Project names to look out for, sharding?
Yeah, so sharding is more in the research phase for the most part. There are various other projects in the space that have claim sharding as a coming soon feature, but I'm not aware of any that are further along than that.
And so, I don't know, it's obviously a sort of hypothetical exercise, but if some of that was deployed or all of that was deployed, what are we talking about? Order of magnitude, 10x more transactions, 1,000x,
so
100,000x?
It's Yeah, it's difficult.
Obviously, it depends on them.
It does. So with a state channel or with a state channel, you can do as many transactions as you want. It just comes down to what your risk tolerance is, how long you're willing to keep it off chain. With side chains, you can sort of build side chains on side chains, and given that, you can basically you can pick a trade-off between how quickly you want to be able to like spider it all the way down to the main chain and how much scalability you want. But even just one level of side chains could provide 3 orders of magnitude improvement, and you can go from there. And similar with sharding, but it's more difficult to say because it depends on the scheme.
Got it. Yeah, very good. Comprehensive. Peter, your turn.
So like that was a good overview, but I think what is important to mention in terms of scalability is it's usually there is some sort of trade-off between security and scalability. So for instance, one could think that deploying basically new chains. So let's say now if we would deploy just a copy of Ethereum and it would just run on its own, now we can process double the amount of Ethereum transactions, but now we need an entire new network of miners to actually secure that chain. And the more chains we have, the lower the security of all those chains will be. So with certain solutions that are currently available. So for instance, bridges to other chains. A bunch of projects are kind of now deploying a separate chain and bridging. Or things like Cosmos, you already kind of as you spread your bags across multiple chains, you lower the security. But then we can, or there are some projects where you get still recover some of this security. So things like Plasma, you can maintain security, but only up to a certain volume of data that would be processed on those additional chains. But then there are solutions that kind of try to fundamentally work on the problem where they don't really trade off the security for scalability, or to a lower extent. And those are solutions such as sharding or Polkadot, where you can actually have multiple parts of the state that communicate with each other, but they all maintain the same level of security. And so that kind of maybe segues a bit into usability, because a lot of the appeal, I think, of the blockchain systems was that you can kind of let the blockchain just do its thing, and you can rely on it to do the right computations. While if the developer needs to start thinking now what is the particular security model that they are working with, it can become quite difficult. There is security in relation to availability and to just validity of state transitions, but generally, I think an important thing is to think how developers will be able to work with it, and what sorts of things they will have to keep in their head in order to build an application.
So maybe building on that point, to what degree do you imagine there might be kind of a decentralized app or dApp portability?
Yeah.
I mean, so ideally, something or something else decides which blockchain to use for which dApp or which function.
Really, kind of speaking more widely, in order for blockchain application, like decentralized applications to be possible, we don't only need blockchain. We need those decentralized file storage systems, P2P messaging, potentially distributed secret storage protocols, and other things. So ideally we are able to abstract kind of the capabilities that different protocols provide, and then be able to provide those capabilities with different protocols. At the same time, if we look at the kind of from the practical point of view, we will need, for instance, let's say when you build an application, and you want someone to use that application on a mobile phone, you don't want them to run 3 different peer-to-peer networking protocols, 5 different blockchains, and whatever else in order to provide all the different capabilities. So an important thing that we like to focus on is how do we enable those protocols to kind of integrate more tightly with each other, so that we can kind of run a tight set of protocols that then supplies all the necessary capabilities to the application. And we need, ideally, long term, we'll have lots of different possibilities and lots of variety in terms of protocols, but we need at least one stack of usable protocols in order to get those great decentralized
Hence your kind of comprehensive full stack approach. So I think I almost let you off the hook without getting to the point of funding on your side. Just to be, again, it's always, I think it's a good thing for people to understand how you guys funded.
So the foundation, as I mentioned, our kind of we are a Swiss non-profit foundation, and our deed basically determines the activity that we do. So our deed talks about supporting decentralized technologies and making Web3 happen, and it details it a little bit. We are basically funded from some of the protocols that we think are crucial, but are not there yet. So one protocol that where we kind of coordinate, for which we coordinate the development is the Polkadot protocol. So we raised our money through distributing the tokens that enable one to govern the network and perform a number of different activities within the network. But it might be the case that in the future, depending on how the community evolves, we might see other protocols that also require a bit of a push in order to actually bring them to life, and then we would.
So do either of the foundations foresee a need to raise any more funding in the foreseeable future?
So I can't officially speak for the Ethereum Foundation, but
Okay.
to the best of my knowledge, not in the foreseeable future.
Got it.
So we will be raising more capital to work on different initiatives,
Okay.
but
Not sure when.
Whenever we need to, we'll try to.
Got it. So let's try and, thanks guys, let's try and close on the interface between this domain of blockchain and decentralized data management and decentralized data networks, and that of AI and algorithms, the whole question of data privacy and ownership. Who'd like to pile in first? Nick?
So I have to confess my own experience is largely focused around large-scale compute and around blockchain. So I have relatively little AI experience. One area that I did think was of interest, and in fact went to a small workshop about it a while ago, is the issue of AI safety, which seems like a far off and speculative topic, although perhaps not to many here. But the things you may want to ensure in that are the same sort of things you would want to ensure in like arms control, where you can actually ensure that laboratories are working on the safe stuff they said they would work on and so forth. And in that sort of context, potentially blockchain can be used to track propagation of technologies and track ownership and origin and so forth. So I think that's an interesting sort of less usual, more speculative but interesting use for a blockchain technology.
So but you're saying tracking sort of weaponized algorithms?
So in the context of AI safety, it's are we building things that have that share goals with us? Do we risk building something that has a goal that's sort of tangential to us or even diametrically opposed? And are we going to make sure that people working on this technology, I'm probably embarrassing myself here in front of AI researchers, but people working on this technology are pursuing it in a way that's safe and is not going to lead to those sort of outcomes.
So like sort of mapping the supply chain for the use of different algorithms, or it could be, to genetic.
I'm thinking more
information
about general purpose AIs.
Okay.
And so if you're engaged in that sort of research, having some way to demonstrate that, yes, you are following best practices and
ethical
so on.
best practices. Got it. Okay.
I think there is three different things. So one is the type of cryptographic techniques that are being developed within crypto blockchain space that could be fairly interesting for AI, for preserving privacy. So things like I think Google presented on that at some point, where you can have your AI model, and rather than vacuuming up the data from the user, you send the model to the user that is in a form that is encrypted, and then you train the model a little bit, and then you get back the model without actually revealing the user's data, improving whatever suggestions you might want to give to the user. So this is a homomorphic encryption, but there are other interesting techniques there as well. The other thing is markets, easier creation of new types of markets. So markets for data, markets for good models, markets for computing. So basically, if you have a machine learning setup, you usually want to build some model, and there are some certain people that are better than others at building good models for particular things. You want to get some data, and you want to get some computation. So for instance, for computation, there are projects like Golem and OpenMind and a bunch of other ones that work on that. On data sets, there is the Ocean protocol, so better markets, easier markets, and then another thing is potentially creating protocols where we can create more open protocols where AI can be developed in a more collaborative or inclusive way. So one nice thing about blockchains is that it creates this interesting incentive setup where people are pretty keen to participate, and it's pretty open participation, and the product is open source, and so on. So maybe thinking in a similar way in which kind of crypto protocols are being developed, try to develop some protocols that will ensure that AIs or machine learning algorithms are more open and more kind of a collaborative effort of all of us. So things like maybe open source search engines or things like that might be possible if the right set of incentives incentive mechanisms is created.
Very good. Peter, sounds like we can ensure that it's ethical, the development of these algorithms. We can protect people's data and make it much more open than we imagined was possible. So I don't know about everyone else in the audience, but that actually felt more like a lot of the issues around scalability are going to be addressed in this fairly near future than well, I left with a positive impression of that. So if we reduce that for a little bit of salesmanship, even from these very technical people, then that gives us some cause for optimism. So we're about out of time, but we can probably take one or two questions from the audience. Somebody would like to go? Just here. Can you introduce yourself first, please? So did you get the question?
Yes. So the question was, what has been the most contentious issue at the Ethereum Foundation in the past year, and how are we going forward? I guess I would say that the most of the contention has been in the Ethereum community. Like, the foundation itself tends to focus on technical efforts, and so while in most community discussions you'll find people at the foundation on both sides, we tend to be not too fundamentalist about it. But I guess the most in the last year, probably the recent thing, is the issue with the whether recovery hard forks should be considered. So if a large amount of funds are lost, is it reasonable to propose a fork that recovers funds for the people that lost them or not? And in the foundation, I think the main attitude is letting users choose is good, and we should leave it up to the community to decide. But then, of course, people inside the foundation have their own opinion as well. So sorry if that wasn't a very satisfying answer. There's not much, getting out the foam bats and beating each other up inside the foundation, if only because we live in different countries.
Good. One more. A bit further afield we'll go, sorry. Yeah. Even better.
Thank you. I came in kind of 3/4 of the way through, so this might have been answered. I work for a VC firm and we invest in blockchain startups. And currently no one knows really whether there is a technical difference between what we call layer 1 and layer 2 protocols. So I wanted to know from your perspective, obviously you want to invest in projects that are innovating at the protocol layer. Obviously, and it's obvious when a team is building a new blockchain, but some teams are building protocols to build on top, but they're not quite dApps. So, from a very technical level, what is the difference between them?
So the kind of the obvious answer is that the layer 2 protocol depends on the layer 1 protocol, while the layer 1 protocol doesn't depend on the layer 2 protocol. So, but kind of the types of, as you say, like oftentimes the layer 2 protocols complement layer 1 protocols, and the other way around as well. But it's just mostly the question of dependency. Could you be running the protocol without any underlying protocol underneath? But I think going kind of just expanding maybe on that question, like I think going forward, we see right now that it will not be enough to just establish those kind of really basic protocols on the bottom and then have every application trying to rebuild their own kind of stack of protocols on top of that. So we really need to think, how do we build this stack of layer 2 protocols as well, how they all interact with each other, and how do we design layer 1 protocols to best support those kind of higher level protocols.
That's a quick follow-up question. Is there any chance that a layer 2 protocol could become a layer 1 protocol?
I think if it's designed explicitly to build on a lower level protocol, then it's always going to be dependent on some form of lower level protocol. But if you look at like the OSI model with networking, then a well-designed protocol can depend on multiple different alternatives for a higher level protocol. So you could potentially build something that was designed to work on top of Bitcoin and port it over to work on top of Ethereum, but it's always going to need some sort of consensus layer underneath it.
And it's a separate question whether or not investing in the protocols means you're going to be as successful as finding something as Bitcoin or Ethereum at storing value. So it's a broader topic. Because we're actually going to be going into a break after this, I believe. So unless we'll have final bidders, one more quick one here.
Microphone behind you.
Hi, thank you very much. I was just wondering about the prioritization process with the projects that were looking into the DAXs and how that process went.
For what?
You mentioned a workshop for decentralized exchanges gathering together and looking at governance structures.
Yeah, so I guess there were two different workshops. So the one that we had already is focused on decentralized exchanges. So we mostly looked at kind of which projects are the most advanced out there in the space. We also asked around the projects that already work on stuff, who other participants should be present there. But at the same time, so that's it. And we try to invite everyone that we knew about that actually made decent kind of work in that area.
Great. Good. So I think we should crack on. Thank you very much. Nick Johnson, working on ENS at the Ethereum Foundation, and Peter Czaban, Executive Director of Web3 Foundation. Thank you very much for your time.